Legendary Scout Trio secrets you need to know. Very secretive. Very legendary.
This video will be an explanation of one important aspect of the Mech Arena meta, which is the relationship between the Legendary Scout Trio. This trio is Surge, Nomad, and Eclipse. I will use the term meta in this video to describe content within Mech Arena that is the strongest available, and the term counter to describe a relationship where one mech generally defeats another due to an advantage in that matchup.
Yeah, so like, something that people, I guess, I don't define those things often enough. People don't really know what meta means. Meta just basically just means that it's the strongest thing possible. Like, if you were to play a competitive, like a max competitive clan war type battle, meta is the type of thing that everyone's going to be using. It's the stuff that's the strongest, the most OP, right? And then counters, yes, essentially. Counters are things that generally defeat other things, but not always. That's the thing. It's like, just because something counters something does not necessarily mean that it always wins.
All three of these mechs are legendary scouts and very powerful within the game, generally considered to be meta. Scout mechs are typically fairly strong when compared to other mech classes. This is because increased speed that scouts tend to have is often more valuable than other stats. For example, tank mechs tend to have higher HP, and attacker mechs generally carry higher firepower, but speed is more helpful throughout matches.
Well, there's a very... yeah, and he's not wrong, but there's a very good reason for that, though. If you have a certain... there's a certain amount of damage that everything has. And if that amount of damage is adequate to kill almost everything, something with, you know, something that has double the HP isn't necessarily going to last double the amount of time. It would in like a bullet spray situation against, like, let's say, minigun or something like that, right? So, like, something that has double the HP is going to last double the amount of time against something like minigun. Sure. But I mean, like, Revoker can basically two-shot almost anything. First off, it doesn't really matter if it takes a couple extra shots, because especially if you have the EMP effect from Surge, which is stupid. But then also, like, Stormrax, where it's like one salvo, one full volley will kill pretty much anything, no matter what it is. But on top of that, another thing that makes Scouts so strong is simply the fact that mods exist, the multi-layered mods exist. Taking down the multi-layered mods is like, it's like 60% of the amount of time that it takes to destroy the mech just entirely. So, 60%, like, I don't know, probably like 50-60% of the amount of time that it takes for you to kill something is spent taking down just the multi-layered shield. And then the rest goes into the HP. The HP isn't that much of it. Like, the HP doesn't actually matter that much. So double the amount of HP doesn't actually mean double the amount of kill time. It's more like 50% extra kill time. So it's like stuff with lower HP because of the way that multi-layered mod shields work. Stuff with lower HP isn't necessarily that much at a disadvantage. It is slightly, but it's not that much. And when you compensate that with, like, really, really strong abilities, like Surge and Eclipse, then, like, obviously, those things are going to be really good. Your opinion, Stormrack is useless without the reload implant? You're correct. Yeah, that's factual. And I've been saying that for a long time. Well, not useless, but not meta. Yeah, it's not... the thing that makes it meta is the reload implant, for sure. But the thing that makes... I mean, in order to use something that's stupidly strong like Revoker, right? In order to use something that's stupidly strong like Revoker, you need something that's actually fast enough to be able to get from point A to point B and close that distance. And that's where Scouts come in once again, right? Because, like, even though attackers, like you mentioned, have more firepower, they don't have more damage output. 32 energy mechs very rarely are capable of effectively using something like Revoker. So their actual damage output, because Revoker is just so much stronger than everything, their actual damage output is less than what the Scout's damage output is. Surge has more damage output because it's able to use a much, much, much stronger weapon effectively. So, yeah, that's most of the reason that Scouts are really, really strong. Even something like Blockhorn. Like, Blockhorn's is a mech that I like to bring up a lot. Because, if you think about it, kind of the only thing that it has going against it is the speed, and that alone was enough to kill it. Like, it's not a meta mech simply because it's not fast. That's the only thing that was required to make it not meta, which is crazy.
So yes, legendary scouts are powerful, but how do these three match up into each other? This particular trio form a great example of a rock, paper, scissors meta. This nickname describes an interaction between powerful characters, weapons, or in this case, mechs within a game. It takes
Or as I like to describe it, the hate triangle of legendary scouts.
the simple and well-known rock, paper, scissors game and applies it to describe the strategy within another game. In case you don't know how rock, paper, scissors works, I'll explain it briefly. Two players each pick either rock, paper, or scissors. Both players then play their choices against each other. Rock always beats scissors, scissors always beats paper, and paper always beats rock. The same choice played against each other is a tie, and players choose again till a winner is decided. Each option beats one other and is beat by the other one and ties with itself. This simple pattern can be applied to our legendary scout trio in Mech Arena. So we have Surge, Nomad, and Eclipse as our three different mechs in the rock, paper, scissors meta. Of course, if any of these mechs are in a fight against themselves, it's a 50-50 tie on who will win, just like in rock, paper, scissors. But
Generally true, although if you want to, and this is why I say ability duration is such a good implant for Surge, when it comes to specifically Surge versus Surge, whichever one has the better ability duration implant will win. Pretty much guaranteed. Or the better mod, like, or the better, like, higher level mod shield, right? That's obviously really important. But for those two, for those specifically, for Surge specifically, it very much just comes down to whether or not you have extra EMP time. Even like a half second of EMP time is way too much damage for anything to be able to really make up for. Like, it's a lot. You can do a lot of damage in half a second with Revoker. Crazy.
when these mechs are put up against each other, who beats who? First up is Surge. Surge has the Storm Dash, which allows it to dash and then stun any enemy in the radius at the end of its dash. Eclipse can negate this stun with its Phase Cloak, which lets Eclipse bypass all status effects like the stun. However, Nomad has no protection against the stun from a Surge. Surge can easily defeat Nomad by stunning and then destroying it. This means that Surge counters Nomad. This is the first part of our meta triangle. Now onto Nomad. It is countered by Surge, but what about when it fights Eclipse? When Nomad dashes, it gains a 60% damage resistance, meaning that it only takes 40% of the damage dealt to it after it dashes. And since Nomad has more HP than Eclipse, it can dash into an Eclipse with more HP and a damage resistance, and is almost always able to outbrawl Eclipse. This means that Nomad...
Unless you're really bad, or if you have like a major disadvantage in terms of like firepower or mod shields or something like that. Yeah, a Nomad should beat an Eclipse every time.
Nomad counters Eclipse.
It's one of the more,
this is the second part of our meta triangle.
Very clearly
and lastly,
obvious ones.
Eclipse. I'm sure you can see where this is going. Like I said earlier, Eclipse ignores all status effects while its Phase Cloak is active, so if a Surge tries to dash and stun it, the stun does not work and Surge is left vulnerable. Eclipse is the clear counter to Surge, and this...
Surge is not left vulnerable. Surge is left with 24 energy capacity of whatever, of probably Revoker, right? 24 energy capacity of firepower, good speed, full mod shield. It has the exact same thing that Eclipse has. So when it comes to Eclipse versus Surge, it's actually 50-50. It's completely 50-50. In that case, neither ability really affects the other. The Phase Cloak of Eclipse doesn't actually give you an advantage over Surge, it just keeps the Surge from being able to insta-kill you. So, like, a Surge can very obviously just, like, it'll straight up beat a Nomad every time. Or at least it should. But it can't do that to Eclipse. But the thing is that the base HP is the same. The base firepower is the same. And the speed is incredibly, incredibly similar. So, at that point, yes, between Eclipse and Surge, it is 50-50. Eclipse is kind of your best bet for dealing with a Surge, but that doesn't make it a direct counter. It's not actually a counter. Eclipse can jiggle better than Surge. That is a metric that one could use to determine value, yeah.
Finishes our meta triangle, and Surge is left vulnerable. Eclipse is the clear counter to Surge, and this finishes our meta triangle. So, as you can see, each of these mechs counter another in a way that we have an infinite cycle of them countering one another, just like in rock, paper, scissors. But how can you actually apply this to your gameplay? The strategy is fairly simple.
And then, between those three, the counter to all three of those is either Deathwalker or Lacewing. It doesn't hard counter them, but it's a pretty good counter to all three of them, both of those mechs. And that's why those are the 5 mechs that you see everywhere. Those are the 5. That's why those are the 5 mechs that you see everywhere. Because you have those 3 that basically break everything. And they have their little triangle thing going on there. Relative triangle. And then the Deathwalker and the Lacewing are the extra ones that can kind of gain an edge on all 3 of those. The Lacewing very much depends on the map. Deathwalker kind of depends on how you play it as well. It's not like hard counter, but it's kind of like Eclipse versus Surge. It's like not exactly 50-50, but it's a little bit in its favor. Hemlock hard counters Surge into Nomad. There's other things that exist in the meta, right? It's like Soulless technically kind of counters Nomad as well. And to some degree Surge. Like, there are ways of, like, these things exist in a meta, but they don't exist in a vacuum. Right? So like there are other things that can influence them. There are other things that can beat them. Like a Bastion can beat both a Nomad and an Eclipse without trouble. But the more specific, like those 3 are so prevalent that like the only way to make any other mech useful is if it's at least moderately good at taking down all 3 of them. And that's why Deathwalker and Lacewing are the only other 2 like popular meta mechs. For a map where Lacewing isn't broken, would you use something like Hemlock instead? Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. That's exactly what I'd do.
Simple. How can you actually apply this to your gameplay? The strategy is fairly simple. Use the counter when fighting against each of these mechs. For example, if you were destroyed by an enemy Eclipse, spawn your Nomad next to take it out by countering it. Or if you saw an enemy Nomad destroy your teammate, use your Surge to stun and destroy it. This goes a bit deeper if you really analyze what your opponents have already deployed during a match. For example, if my opponent deployed Surge at the start of a match to capture beacons and then was destroyed, I know they can't respawn and Surge again, so I might expect them to use another meta mech, like Eclipse. To counter this with my prediction, I used Nomad, hoping to counter the Eclipse that they might spawn. Additionally, I already know their Surge was destroyed already, so they don't have the mech to counter my Nomad. In Hangar Showdown, it's easy to track which mechs the enemy has already used. If both of my opponents have spawned Nomad by round 3, I know they won't have that.
This is why Surge is the safest mech to go with, by the way. Because like I mentioned, Surge versus Surge, it's basically 50-50, but it depends on if you have the longer ability duration. Surge versus Eclipse, also 50-50. And then Surge versus Nomad, the Surge wins every time. So Surge is the safest mech to go for, always. Does that necessarily mean that you should always start with it? No. Because again, Surge is the safest mech to go for. So it's going to be very good against almost everything. And if it dies right off the bat, if you don't want to waste it, right? You don't want to throw a Surge into, you don't want to throw away a Surge killing nothing useful, and then end up needing it later, but then you don't have it later, right? So yeah, it depends. It depends. But yeah, Surge is like by far the most the safest mech to go for, and it's probably the most OP mech. And if you're gonna if you're thinking like, oh, between Surge and Eclipse, I'd probably go for Surge. Because again, basically 50-50 Surge versus Surge, basically 50-50 Surge versus Eclipse, and Surge easily wins versus Nomad. So yeah. JDM, you gotta go. Okay, bye.
Mech to counter my Eclipse, so I spawn my Eclipse. This strategy can also be applied when synergizing with your teammate in Hangar Showdown. If my teammate has selected Surge as their mech, I want to pick something that complements it best. Surge is countered by Eclipse, so I will pick Nomad to counter a possible enemy Eclipse spawn. This way, each of us has a higher chance of getting an advantage in our matchups, leading to more success in Hangar Showdown. These are just some simple examples of how the rock, paper, scissors meta of the Scout Trio is important to consider in your gameplay. Keep in mind, each of these mechs have other mechs that counter them, and they all counter other mechs. The meta is wider than just this interaction. but this is important to understand and apply to other interactions within the game.
It is the most
I'd also like to
important
note that
aspect
while
of the
Eclipse
game.
does ignore Surge's stun, it is not nearly as strong of a counter as Surge is to Nomad or Nomad is to Eclipse. Eclipse doesn't get stunned, but it still has to destroy the Surge, and the Surge can fight back just fine. Thanks.
So he does kind of mention what I say, but I think to an extent you can't really call Eclipse a counter. Eclipse isn't countered by Surge, but Eclipse itself is not a counter to Surge. So I think you can't really call it a counter. You could just, you could mention the fact that it's not countered by it. Eclipse is like one of the only things that isn't countered by Surge, which is what makes it valuable, right? Parasite counters all but Eclipse, of course. Yeah, there's a lot of things that don't counter Eclipse. Most things don't counter Eclipse. And the thing to keep in mind as well is, like, it's also a speed thing, like I mentioned earlier. Like I mentioned at the start. The speed thing is really important because these mechs, these scouts, are all using Revokers, which are the highest DPS you can get. Anything that's slower than that, and I think Eclipse just barely makes it, right? I think Eclipse is about the slowest you can possibly get while still making good use out of Revoker. Almost any other mech, it can be a natural counter to it. Like, it could be a natural counter, whatever. Like I mentioned with Bastion. Bastion easily counters both Nomad and Eclipse. But only if it also has Revoker. The problem is that mechs that are fast, like these scouts, they can use Revokers, but most other mechs can't. So the scouts have like 3 times the DPS that these other mechs have, even though they have the same energy capacity, where they even have less energy capacity, they have more DPS. Even though, let's say freaking even like Deathwalker. Even like Deathwalker. Something like a Surge or a Nomad or an Eclipse, with Revokers, they have more DPS, they have more available damage output than Deathwalker does, unless the Deathwalker's also using Revoker. And that's the problem. And even if the Deathwalker was using Revoker, it would still take out the multi-layered shields at the same rate, and it would only increase the kill time, or decrease the kill time by a little bit when it comes down to just the raw HP. And so it's not a big deal. So the problem is that, including multi-layered mod shields, almost everything is about equally as tanky. Anything with Revoker gains an absolutely massive advantage against anything without Revoker. And so at that point, you're left with mechs that are trying desperately to be able to kill these 3 mechs that are everywhere. And that's essentially what defines the meta. Is what else can actually kill these three scouts. Zephyr is the slowest. Well, like, technically you could say Parasite's the slowest, but I'm talking about, like, in a competitive scenario that isn't 2v2. In a Hangar Showdown scenario, yeah, you could use, like, you could use Parasite, you could use Deathwalker. Deathwalker's really good in Hangar Showdown with Revoker. But no, I'm talking about in a more generic sense. In a more general sense. In terms of actual meta. Like, yes, Zephyr can use Revoker well at the SP that Zephyr is used at, but in terms of the meta, no, Zephyr cannot be used well with Revoker. If you see that Eclipse isn't counter to Surge, it's not counter to much mechs, it's only counter to mechs like Redox. It's not even a counter to Redox. So, given the assumption, here's the thing. And it's exactly what I'm trying to say. This is exactly what I'm trying to say. Exactly the reason why speed matters so much. We're in a speed meta. And this is why I don't necessarily hate Revoker as much as I hate the scouts that use them. Given the assumption, because Redox has the same base HP as Eclipse. Given the assumption that neither ability affects the other, or the assumption that the abilities cancel out each other, let's say. Given that assumption, you're then left with 2 metrics to deal with. You're left with raw HP, raw energy capacity, raw firepower. Raw HP, raw firepower. Assuming they're using the same weapon, the mech with the most HP and the most firepower is going to win. Redox has the same HP as Eclipse does, but it has more firepower. So, realistically, 1v1 in an isolated scenario, where they're both using the same weapon, Redox would win. But you can't think about it like that. The problem is that Redox can't be used with Revoker. And this is where the speed meta becomes a problem. The problem is that Redox has to be used with some other weapon. Even if it's Stormrack, Stormrack the other best weapon, even if it's Stormrack, Revoker has, once again, might I just bring to people's attention, like, I can't stress this enough, Revoker has 3 times the DPS of Minigun. 3 times. There is no weapon, I don't care what energy it is, there is no weapon that will outperform Revoker. Especially Revoker 12, but even Revoker 10. I would also have you know that Revoker 10 does just as well as Revoker 12 because it's just that strong. So, at that point, the one that wins is the one with most firepower. So, yes, in terms of energy capacity, Redox would win almost anything, actually, would win against an Eclipse. Almost anything. Because almost everything has at least a bit more HP and the same or higher energy capacity. But you can't think about it in terms of energy capacity. You're thinking about it in terms of firepower. In terms of brute firepower, with Revoker, Eclipse always has more. So Revoker Eclipse is just way higher DPS than anything else that you have. So it doesn't matter, like, the energy capacity doesn't really matter. So at that point, it's, yes, Eclipse has less energy capacity, or not less energy, but it has less HP, significantly weaker in terms of HP, but the multi-layered mods make up for a lot of that. Once again, like, the multi-layered mods essentially worked to, like, bring the gap between HP together. Well, not even just the multi-layered ones, but all of them, really. The multi-layered mods make up for a significant portion of the total kill time. But not only that, something like an Eclipse gets a higher percentage bonus from, like, Hardened Hull than something like a Bastion does. Bastion gets, I believe, 43% from a maxed legendary Hardened Hull. And Eclipse gets, I believe, 57%. Just off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure those are the numbers. So it's, you know, the mods as a feature essentially work to, like, shrink the gap in HP. So you end up with mechs that are relatively similar in terms of kill time. And you have the faster mechs that can, like, wield these insanely OP weapons that have, once again, can't stress this enough, 3 times the DPS of Minigun, which in itself is an insanely high DPS weapon. So it's not even close. It's not even close. The reason that, like, and because, like, yes, under normal circumstances, yes, something like a Redox technically should normally defeat an Eclipse. It should, normally. Because it has the same HP, but it's more energy capacity. But in a practical scenario, in a more practical scenario, then the, you know, something that's slow can't use Revoker. And that's why slow mechs are so freaking bad. Unless that slow mech is able to specifically counter all 3 of the legendary scouts, like Deathwalker. Deathwalker's not that fast, but it's like sort of decent, right? Sort of decently fast. It is a relative counter to all 3 of them, and that's the only reason that makes it good. It's the only thing that makes it good. Same thing with, like, Lacewing. What about Minigun Eclipse? Well, that's exactly the reason that most people don't use Minigun Eclipse. Now, I think the downside of Revoker is that it doesn't have that much range. And so, you know, when we're talking strategy, if you want to talk strategy, then I think that Revoker Eclipse, if played well, can counter the Revoker Scouts. If you play it well, if you play it carefully. It can counter most Revoker Surges, most Revoker Eclipses. Because it's still fairly fast, and you have, again, good DPS. Good DPS, not nearly as much as Revoker has, but good DPS, and you have much better effective range. So you can chew them down from a distance, and even if they do get close to you, by the time they get close, they're at way less HP, and they're not able to necessarily kill you instantly. So if you play it well, if you play it carefully, I think that something with range can potentially outdo something with without range. And that's like obviously, right? That's the difference between close quarters and ranged weapons. It's just like a pretty obvious difference there. Sun's coming up. But yeah. So like there's differences, right? And like BMP even said, there are other mechs that counter the trio of legendary scouts, and these trio of legendary scouts do counter other things, right? They don't exist in a vacuum. So it's like, yeah, there are ways to kill it. There are other ways to kill it, but it's just like not exactly practical, right? It's not exactly practical. Eclipse can make many weapons effective because Eclipse has almost zero counters. Well, yeah, that's true as well. Yeah. Eclipse doesn't really have specific counters outside of things that just... Well, okay. I don't know. It's technically correct, but it's technically incorrect. It's not going to be hard countered by abilities. Most abilities. But technically, it is technically countered by most things. Because in terms of when you're talking just generic weapon damage, generic energy capacity, when it comes to just HP and energy, Eclipse is on the lowest end for both of those in terms of legendary mechs. It's on the lowest end of both of those spectrums. So anything with even like a Redox, right, which has the same HP but more energy capacity. Even a Redox is technically a reasonable counter to something like an Eclipse if it didn't have Revoker. Or if both mechs had a Revoker, for example, right? Use Overdriver on Eclipse right now because I'm broke. No, that's fair. I mean, Overdriver, Minigun, they're essentially the same. Like, one of my clanmates prefers Overdriver over Minigun, so, like, yeah, if it works for you. I don't blame you either, because it's way cheaper, yeah. I wouldn't at this point. Minigun's just a personal preference of mine. Most tanks counter Eclipse? Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's exactly what it says. Like, Eclipse is on the lowest end of both HP and energy capacity spectrum. In terms of legendary mechs, almost everything is more powerful than Eclipse, if you're not counting abilities. But the simple fact that Eclipse is fast enough to use Revoker is what makes it meta. Essentially. If it wasn't faster, if it was like, and I'm not even kidding you, if it was like 3 kph slower, I don't think it would be meta. I think it barely fits the bill. I think sometimes it's a little bit too slow. Even Eclipse is like sometimes still a little bit too slow. And if it was just a little bit slower, I don't think it would be that meta. But it is fast enough to use Revoker, and it's fast enough to use them well. And that's all that matters, right? For a weapon that has 3 times the DPS of anything else. Or a tank with a close quarters. Yeah. You could do that too. Yeah, it would also have to have Revoker. But most tanks can't make good use out of it. Like, in an isolated instance, like, Vortex technically could. But then again, it's like, why is Vortex not very strong? Vortex theoretically should be able to beat all 3 of those. Revoker Vortex should theoretically be able to beat all 3 legendary scouts. And I know for a fact that Vortex isn't meta anymore. Could I tell you why? No, I'm not really sure I could tell you why. I don't know. I mean, outside of the fact that, like, Deathwalker just does the same thing but better, like, obviously. Deathwalker is also just, like, a damage sponge that you can throw in with a lot of damage output. But, I mean, Deathwalker could just resurrect and do it all over again as many times as it wants. So, like, I understand why Deathwalker replaced Vortex in terms of popularity. But, like, could I tell you why nobody uses Vortex anymore? No, not really. It's an interesting question, though.
For watching this video, if to destroy the Surge, and the Surge can fight back just fine. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or it was helpful, leave a like to support it. Subscribe to see...
Not bad. Very cool. Yeah. Link to this in pin message. Very cool. Not bad. It's like, it's probably obvious information for some of you guys, but it's also not obvious information to a lot of people. So, yeah. Parasite is just a superior vortex. Well, Deathwalker is also a superior vortex. But like, just because something's superior doesn't mean that it's the other one's not effective, right? Like, if Vortex was still effective, certainly some people would use it, but they don't. So, like, why is that the case then, right? You gotta wonder. You gotta wonder, why is that the case? If it's still theoretically useful, if it's still theoretically good, why does nobody use it? Not sure. But anyway, yeah. Decent video. I should probably make videos more like this sometimes, bro. That just like just kind of explain just certain general concepts, things that I talk about a lot, but don't necessarily explain in a like a real defined, formal way. I like the fact that he explained everything, like what meta means, what counters, like what the definition of like meta, definition of counter. He explained how like the rock paper scissors system works. Good stuff. Yeah, and BMP is a person that we react to a lot of his stuff on here, so I would recommend go watch his stuff. I don't react to everything. Go check out his channel. Again, the link to this specific video is pinned, so